right, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to this meeting that will now come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my left is Supervisor Aaron Peskin. Our clerk is Victor Young, and also want to recognize our talented technicians at SFGov TV, Jesse Larson and Phil Jackson, that are assisting us with this broadcast. My apologies to everyone that thought this committee meeting started at 1:30. You were correct. I was tied up in the Rules Committee. This is our last week in session, and so we are taking care of last-minute business and details, and it ran over. So please accept my apology. But without further ado, Mr. Clerk, do we have any announcements this afternoon?
Yes, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the January 10, 2017 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Could you call item 1?
Item number 1, ordinance amending ordinance number 1061 entitled Regulating the Width of Sidewalks to change the official sidewalk width along a portion of the easterly side of 30th Avenue between Clement Street to the north and Gary Boulevard to the south.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Folks, we have Mr. Javier Rivera from the Public Works here with us. He's going to make a short presentation on this item.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Javier Rivera from Public Works. So this legislation is for the reduction of a small portion of 30th Avenue on the easterly side. It's part of the Presidio Middle School modernization project. And what it'll do is allow San Francisco Unified School District to create ADA-compliant ramps in a pickup drop-off zone. The maximum reduction will be 5 feet for this area, and it'll leave 10 feet remaining for as sidewalk. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to respond. Otherwise, that's pretty much all I have.
So, Mr. Rivera? Rivera. Thank you for that correction. I have a couple comments, and then we'll go to Supervisor Peskin, and then I'll say my remarks. Mr. Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I was just going to raise one issue just relative to the noticing. I think that if you're a member of the public and you see this notice insofar as it doesn't tell the public that the sidewalk length is going to be reduced, I think these type of notices would be much more instructive to the public if that instead of just saying changing the width, that it actually says reducing the width from 15 feet to 10 feet or reducing it by 5 feet. That way, I mean, it might bring somebody to public comment that otherwise might not really understand what this is about. So I just it's really maybe less of a comment for you and more of a comment for the Deputy City Attorney who drafted the legislation and the short title.
Okay, absolutely. I mean, that's certainly something we could change in our legislation. To be honest, a majority of these are widening, so they no longer come through the board. But we could add that to anything coming over here.
And maybe even if we forward it today, depending on what the chair wants to do, we could actually change the short title to reflect that.
Sure, I think it's perfectly acceptable because we're just changing from 15 feet to 10 down to 10 feet. Is that right?
10 feet, correct. It'll allow for a drop-off pickup zone with ADA-compliant ramps.
All right. Well, let's take public comment, shall we? All right, ladies and gentlemen, please come up for public comment on item 1. Just as a reminder, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. You'll hear a soft chime indicating 30 seconds remaining on your time. All right, seeing no public comment is closed at this time. Mr. Peskin, do you have a motion?
So I would suggest that we amend the title to say, to amend the short title to say sidewalk width reduction dash portion of, so say width change to width reduction, and send it forward with recommendation to the full board.
All right. And without objection, that motion passes. Mr. Clerk, item 2, please.
That was the motion to amend. Is there a motion to recommend it?
I would recommend it as amended.
Without objection, that motion passes.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, item number 2, resolution extending interim zoning controls that require conditional use authorization for medical cannabis dispensaries in the Irving, Judah, Noriega, and Terraville Street neighborhood commercial districts and imposing additional conditional use authorization criteria.
So Supervisor Tang is the sponsor of this item, and she is still in the Rules Committee, which should be ending very shortly. She's asked that we continue this item to later in the agenda. Is that all right with you? All right, may I have a motion to continue this for later in the agenda, please? May I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, thank you. Without objection. Mr. Clerk, could you call the next item, please?
Would you like me to read item 3 and 4 together?
Yes, I would.
Item number 3, resolution declaring the intent of the Board of Supervisors to order the conditional vacation of certain San Francisco Public Utilities Commission public service easement that exists within sub-phase 1A and 1B of Park Merced Development Project areas, an approximately 152-acre site located in Lake Merced District in the southwest corner of San Francisco and generally bonded by Vidal Drive, Font Boulevard, Pinto Avenue, and Serrano Drive to the north, 19th Avenue, Jupiter Serrera Boulevard to the east, Brotherhood Way to the south, and Lake Merced Boulevard to the west, reserve certain easement rights in favor of the SFPUC, delegate authority to the Director of Real Estate to execute certain quitclaim deeds. Item number 4, ordinance ordering the conditional vacation of certain San Francisco Public Utilities Commission public service easement that exists within subphase 1A and 1B of the Park Merced Development Project area of an approximately 152-acre site located in the Lake Merced District.
All right, thank you. So Supervisor Yee is the author of these items, and I believe we have a member of Public Works to present on this item. Item 3 is simple. It's an easement vacation, and item 4 corresponds to item 3.
Correct. Yes, so Javier Rivera from Public Works. Yes, this is it's various locations with easements throughout the 152-acre area of Park Merced. While they're easement, we always follow the same protocol as we do for streets because it provides more notice to the public as far as letting people know when and where they'll be vacated. Again, this is pretty standard for the development, needed for the development, and PUC will have some easements remaining until there are replacements for those lines, and those lines have either been approved or there's a public improvement agreement in place. Again, if you have any questions, I'm here, and also the project sponsors here as well, if you have any questions for that.
I don't think we have any questions. Let's go ahead to public comment. Any public comment for items 3 and 4? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Mr. Peskin.
So I would like to make a motion to send item 3 to the full board as a committee report with recommendation, and send item 3 to the full board as a committee report with recommendation, and send item number 4 for our next board meeting on January the 20th.
All right.
January the 10th, excuse me.
Yes, regarding item number 4, I believe you would want to refer that without recommendation to the January 10th, 2017 meeting.
That is my motion.
All right. Without objection, that motion passes unanimously. Could you call item 5, sir?
Item number 5, ordinance amending the planning code to add section 249.15 to create the Mission and 9th Street Special Use District in the area generally bonded by Mission Street on the south, Lasky Street on the east, amending the zoning map sheet SU07 to create the Mission and 9th Street Special Use District, amending zoning map sheet HT07 to change the height limit.
All right, thank you. Item number 5 is sponsored by Supervisor Kim. She is on her way to the meeting now. So we've heard this item before, and it's back before us due to Supervisor Kim's office. There's been some slight changes I think she wants to make.
And I believe Mr. Starr might be able to speak to those from our Department of City Planning.
Sure. I believe this item is going to create a new SUD.
I'm actually only tangentially aware of it, but I believe that it's revising the ordinance to add the Commission's recommendation, which is to add another 3.5% affordable for moderate income or 150% area median income. But Supervisor Kim is here, and I think she can speak a lot better to it than I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim, welcome. We're just discussing item 5, the planning code zoning map for Mission and 9th Street. That's a SUD.
So we did hear this at Land Use Committee last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago. We realized on Tuesday that the commitment that Planning Department had negotiated with the project sponsor at the commission hearing wasn't actually enumerated in the language of the ordinance that is before us today. So I did make a motion to amend last Tuesday. It did require that ordinance to come back to committee, and it's simply a slight increase in the affordable housing commitment of the project sponsor. I'm committing to 11 units at 150% of average median income, on top of the units that the community had previously negotiated with the project sponsor. So this is now a total of 75 below market rate units, ranging between 55% and 150% of average median income. In many ways, this is akin to the policy discussion that we had in regards to the dial, in ensuring that in a single project that we have BMR units that will be marketed at a very diverse range of average median income, from low income to clearly middle class income. And so, colleagues, I just ask for your support today for this simple amendment.
Thank you. Let's go to public comment on item number 5. Seeing no public comment? All right, public comment is closed. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Is there any last remarks?
Just again, I just want to recognize the project sponsor for doing a Herculean job of making sure that he came forward to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors with a deal that the entire community is supporting, including South of Market Community Action Network, United Players, SF HAC, our Central Market CBD, and San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council. It is not often that we get a development project like this neatly tied with a bow tie. Thank you for saving our office the work of the negotiating. And I'm very excited about this project moving forward. Colleagues, I ask for your support one more time.
All right, thank you. Is there a motion for this item?
Yeah, I think the third time is a charm. I would like to send this matter to the full board with recommendation as a committee report for consideration tomorrow.
All right, thank you. Without objection.
I may have missed it myself. Were there any additional amendments today? Or no? Sorry. My apologies.
No more than the ones that I introduced on Tuesday, but I believe they're already embedded into the ordinance.
My misunderstanding. This matter is recommended as committee report.
Perfect, thank you. Could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2, resolution extending interim zoning controls that require conditional use authorization for medical cannabis dispensaries in the Irving, Judah, Noriega, and Terraville neighborhood commercial districts and imposing additional conditional use authorization criteria.
Thank you. Supervisor Tang is the author of this measure.
Thank you very much, committee members, for entertaining this item. So I do feel that a little bit of background is, as soon as our committee members are paying attention, I feel that the background is actually really important for this item. Back in 2012, former Supervisor Carmen Chu had passed legislation to impact just the District 4 NCD, so that would be Irving, Judah, Terraville, and Noriega, requiring conditional use if the ground floor use was not an active use. The intent actually stemmed from community input about wanting a conditional use process when it came to MCDs. And I want to clarify that this is not to prohibit, but just to include a neighborhood notification process, an appeal process, and so forth. And so, however, later on in time, the Planning Department had proposed a planning code cleanup. As you know, it's a massive document with, 1,000 pages or something like that. In it contained a code change that inadvertently impacted the zoning change for the MCDs in the District 4 neighborhood commercial districts. So then, when I was supervisor, we had to introduce interim zoning controls to fix that problem. And we had intended for another planning code change legislation brought forth by the planning department to permanently fix it. But since that is long delayed, we wanted to prevent any confusion over the law in District 4. And so that is why we are extending the interim zoning controls for MCDs, requiring a CU in the District 4 corridors. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or have planning department staff come up before us today.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I just wanted to kind of get your philosophy. I can understand initially the desire to introduce the interim controls, but now that we are post Prop 64, kind of wanted to get your take. Don't you? Do you believe that we should be legislating in a piecemeal type of fashion?
Well, I think that like we do for even restaurants or so forth, even businesses that are, generally speaking, very favorable to the community, we still do require CUs. All that the neighbors were asking for was some neighborhood notification, the ability for the Planning Commission and departments to look at MCDs with the necessary and desirable criteria. Again, this is not a prohibition on MCDs in District 4.
So, so the issue is notification for the surrounding neighborhood?
It's not only notification, but it's also the necessary and desirable criteria that the planning department and commissions would be looking at.
Okay. Have you spoken to the advocates on trying to come to some kind of an agreement?
And are you talking about cannabis advocates or community residents?
Well, I would imagine you've already talked to community advocates on that. So, yes, the cannabis.
No, we have not, because frankly, this is really a neighborhood issue in our district that stemmed back in even before 2012 when the initial legislation was put into place. So really predating my time as supervisor, but it's something that it was only because of an inadvertent code change through the planning department that we even had to go and do interim zoning controls in the first place. Otherwise, I would not have done that.
All right. Let's go to public comment. Public comment is open at this time.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you, Supervisor Tang, for bringing this forward. My name is Terrence Allen. I'm a patient and advocate, a founding board member of the first medical cannabis dispensary in San Francisco known as CHAMP, arrested in the early 90s for growing 24 plants in my closet for my now deceased lover who lost the battle with AIDS. I used cannabis for appetite increasing during the time when the AIDS drugs were not only very difficult on your system, but really did not work. I moved on to help pass Prop 215 and then founded, as the founding president, the San Francisco Entertainment Commission, and I'm currently a citizen who is involved as the chair of the San Francisco State Legalization Task Force, which was created by unanimous vote, thank you very much, of the supervisors and signed by the mayor. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not on behalf of any group or the task force, and my introduction is for informational purposes only. I begin by expressing my great respect for the neighborhood process and the need for a diverse forum where all voices affected by city policy are heard. I'm disturbed that the cannabis community was not involved as an all voices heard in this process, and my appearance here today is to make the request that that be done. I know how inclusive the existing mandatory discretionary review process is currently required for all MCDs, and ask that creating a higher barrier by creating a conditional use authorization simply trumps out any of those socially disadvantaged, those leaving the incarcerated state, those where social justice and equity are the primary reason for them being able to move into the cannabis industry. They are locked out by the addition of more cost and more expense. And I urge, while I would not stop this from going forward, I urge that we consider those folks, those patients, in any legislation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another speaker that'd like to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. I'd like to recognize first Supervisor Kim, then Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I was not intending to sit for this item, but I did see it before in the forward calendar. And Supervisor Tang, I'm so sorry if you did include this in your opening remarks, but being that this is the second time that we are now continuing the interim controls, is there permanent legislation that you're working on for the neighborhood in regards to this?
So, through the chair to Supervisor Kim, as I kind of alluded to it, I would not have even brought forth the first interim control had this zoning control change been inadvertently changed by one of those massive planning code cleanups. So, honestly, this is not my preference to be here. So, it was originally supposed to be permanent.
And is there legislation in place to make this permanent?
Yes, it's currently making its way through the Planning Commission. I think now been pushed back to February. So we wanted to prevent confusion over what the laws are in District 4. So hence the second interim control being extended.
I think the one concern I have is the same one that Supervisor Cohen had shared, which is just about the outreach that we've done to all the impacted stakeholders. I understand that this is being done on behalf of the neighborhood, so that was why initially the work was done there. But it is impacting a group of small businesses here in San Francisco, and I think it would be helpful to hear from them, even if we're trying to make sure that there's as much notification as possible. And by the way, I'm a big believer in notification. I'm one that pushed for that. In our CEQA reforms that we did several years ago, I think that we should provide as much public notification as possible for new businesses coming in. I just have concern about a legislation move forward where we don't at least hear from a group of stakeholders that are being impacted, even if at the end of the day we move forward with the same piece of legislation. So I just wanted to share those concerns.
Supervisor Peskin?
I think Supervisor Kim largely said what I was going to say. I'm fine with this. It is a result of one of these well-intended code changes that then ends up screwing up all kinds of things. And it's an existing one that's being extended for 6 months. I just want to concur with the thought that in the wake of the passage of Prop 64, we need to do this comprehensively citywide and not piecemeal it. But this is a continuation of an existing interim control that hopefully will be rolled into or in some other way accommodated when we do citywide controls.
Right. If I may bring up Mr. Terrence, I have a quick question. I don't know if he's still here, Mr. Terrence Allen. Thank you. Supervisor Peskin raises an interesting point. This is existing condition that's already out there, and we're looking to extend it for another 6 months.
Correct.
An extension of 6 months, does it disrupt the legalization task force process in any way, or can it be a complementary extension? Can they coexist?
I think if done correctly and there is an invitation by the supervisor to include the task force, then it can be. There has not yet been. 6 months in normal life means very little. 6 months in the cannabis world is a complete change. 12 months ago, we didn't have a task force. We didn't have recommendations now until this week on Wednesday. 18 months ago, the state had not moved at all on medical cannabis legalization recommendations, and they had not done that since 420 passed.
So
6 months is a long time in this world, and with the state requiring local authority before an application can be brought to the state, the 6 months could be a fatal blow.
What is the task force goal in the next 6 months?
The task force, in its first report, will demonstrate the entirety of what cannabis touches as we look at comprehensive citywide cannabis reform. And then in the second year, an executive legislative committee will be put together that will come to you on a regular basis with specific regulations and legislative reform that we would like to see. So the making permanent of these controls should be a part of that process, and the task force would then be a stakeholder in that process. So it would be neighbors and the supervisor and other groups involved, and the task force should be recognized because it was created by you, and it should be recognized as a major stakeholder in that discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Tang,
Thank
I'd
you.
love to hear your thoughts.
With all due respect, again, as I've stated before, I would not be here the first time around or the second around with interim controls had it not been for an error that had occurred inadvertently, a mistake. And so that is why I did not feel it was necessary to reopen this conversation in a new way, because I'm actually just trying to fix what should have been in place since 2012. I see gave you promotion. Aaron Starr here from Planning Department. So through
Sure,
the
I'd
chair,
love to
maybe.
recognize you, Mr. Starr.
Sure, I just wanted to affirm what Supervisor Tang had said. It was in the code, although in a very roundabout way, and we did advise against putting it in a roundabout way just for reasons like this. It's not as clear. We like things to be clear in the code so it's easy to implement. But also with regards to Prop 64, so medical cannabis dispensaries are just that. They're for medical cannabis, which has been legal in California since 1986. What passed in November was adult use cannabis. They are two separate things. They do overlap, but what the task force is charged to do is focus things specifically on adult use cannabis and how we will regulate that in the future. So the changes that Supervisor Tang is making are independent of what is happening with the task force and what was approved under Prop 64.
Thank you for that clarification. Sure, no problem. Supervisor Kim.
Mr. Starr, what do you mean in a roundabout way?
It was put in the code as anything that is not an active ground floor use requires conditional use authorization. So rather than putting under the line item medical cannabis dispensary, you need conditional use, that's the way they did that. But the intention was to make cannabis dispensaries conditional use.
So in the previous to the cleanup in the planning code, there was a CU required for non-active ground floor use, and it was implied that MCDs were included in that, although not explicitly expressed. In the cleanup, you took that out.
No, in the cleanup, we added medical cannabis dispensaries to the list of active ground floor uses based on the 2014 report we did for medical cannabis dispensaries, which sought to normalize the use within neighborhood commercial districts by opening them up to the public, making transparency, and making them a little more friendly to the environment or to the pedestrian experience in the neighborhood.
So are MCDs now active ground floor use?
They are, yes.
Okay, and in the previous planning code, you had defined them as inactive ground floor use, and then you changed that categorization.
Correct. They weren't. It's not a. It's not defined. It's a list of uses that are considered active ground floor uses, and we added that to the list.
I see. But originally, the concept of a CU was really to prevent non-active ground floor use, not specifically to create additional notification for MCDs.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Through the chair to Supervisor Kim. That was actually former Supervisor Chu's intent, was additional notification and the planning criteria of necessary and desirable.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Peskin, any other further thoughts? Nope. All right, thank you very much for your presentation. So Supervisor Tang, I think before I take a motion, I just want to make sure I'm clear and on the record that this is an extension of an already existing exception, and this is for only 6 months, and it's until the cleanup language is reflected into the code. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Peskin, do you have a motion for this item?
Yeah, why don't we move this to the full board with recommendation as, I believe, a committee report.
Yes, thank you. All right, without objection, it moves forward. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, Mr. Clerk, where did we leave off? I think it was item
number 6 is next.
All right. Supervisor Kim, I think this is your...
May I read the title?
Please call item 6.
Item number 6, ordinance amending the Downtown Support Special Use District to authorize a monetary contribution to satisfy requirement on-site open space requirements, excluding certain features from floor area ratio and gross floor area.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Kim, you are also the author of this item. Do you have any...
We can't proceed until Supervisor Peskin
Oh,
returns.
that's correct. Could you go get him? Okay, thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Chair Cohen and Supervisor Peskin. Back in 2014, the project sponsor, the Intercontinental Hotel, first approached our office about a requirement that they had fulfilled on their site, affectionately known as POPOs, privately owned public spaces that we require of our downtown buildings. After several years of opening, actually close to a decade, through the usage, even with additional signage, they found that this fourth floor terrace POPO was not well utilized by members of the public. They came to our office to see if there was a way that they could, quote unquote, offsite this POPO obligation through a fee or through acquiring more open space in the neighborhood so that we could have actively used open space that members of our community would enjoy, and the hotel could then utilize this existing POPO for private use. We worked with them over the course of a year and a half to identify an alleyway that we could improve and acquire and turn into an actively utilized open space. And we examined a lot of different alternatives, but could not find one that both the community could agree on, but also that we could acquire through the city. So we then instead worked through a fee out for the first time here in the Eastern Neighborhood Open Space Plan. And we had originally proposed a $78 per square foot fee out at the time, with the fee going to the SOMA Stabilization Fund for future approval. After an additional 2 years of community conversations and negotiations with members of the South of Market community, the planning department, we now have introduced, after 2 years, legislation which has negotiated a new fee based on real cost. We also, in the end, decided to invest these fees into existing open space, but one that would allow us to use it for greater extensive time, therefore making this open space much more actively used. So the community had said that improved lighting at our only multi-use park, Victoria Manalo Draves Park on Folsom Street, was one way that we could activate and increase the use of existing open space by having lights that would allow the park to stay open until later and have basketball games, baseball games, as well as dog walking, and ensure that people feel safe using the park at night, especially in the winter when we know that the day often goes dark by 5 p.m. We worked closely with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development to help calculate a fee, not based on the Transbay, the Transit Center District Plan, nor just Eastern Neighborhood, but one that was actually based on what it would cost to acquire or improve open space here in the South of Market. They calculated the fee based on recent Mint Plaza, Annie Alley, and Eagle Plaza improvements in the South of Market. This legislation specifies the amount of this fee and also how this fee will be used. We also, to ensure that this improvement actually occurs, requires that the much-needed improvement be delivered within 2 years of Rec and Park receiving the fee. If this improvement is not made, this fund will then default into the SOMA Stabilization Fund for the community to determine how to best improve open space in the South of Market area with these funds. Because the Intercontinental Hotel is a unique project to begin with its own SUD, we want to make it clear that this is not a precedent being set for future fee-outs of other downtown buildings that may also determine that their privately owned public spaces aren't well utilized and therefore want to convert it to private use and fee out to the city in a way that improves our open space. We know that POPOs are a key feature of the Central SOMA Open Space Requirement Plan, so we want to make sure that future POPOs are as much as possible activated, accessible, and on the ground floor. In this case, this requirement was not in place. The fee that is before us today is approximately $290 a square foot. This was based on the cost of improvements, again, to the Mint Plaza, Eagle Alley, and Annie Alley that took place in the South of Market area, and that is the legislation before us today. So, colleagues, I know that Ann Topier from the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development is here, and I believe that Sarah Madlin from Rec and Park is here as well to speak, to answer any questions. Oh, I guess it's Mr. Starr. Mr. Starr from the Planning Department as well, if there are any questions from members of committee.
I have a couple questions. Mr. Starr, do you have a presentation, or should I just jump into my questions?
I have a presentation, but I can
All right.
go for you.
I'll wait.
Okay. Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs. As Supervisor Kim so eloquently put, the proposed ordinance would amend the Downtown Support Special Use District to, 1, authorize a monetary contribution for the privately owned public open space, also known as a POPO, exclude certain features from floor area ratio and gross floor area ratio calculations, and would dedicate the money generated from this fee for lighting and safety improvements to the Victoria Manalo Draves Park. On behalf of the Commission, the Department thanks Supervisor Kim for incorporating their recommended modifications. These modifications will accomplish 2 goals. The first change ensures that any impact that these that fees that would be due to the city for enclosing the POPOs with the canopy will be paid. The second change tightens up the findings in the ordinance to avoid setting future precedent for other POPO requirements. The Commission reinforced that it is their strong preference to not allow a project sponsor to opt out of providing on-site usable open space by paying an in lieu fee. The Commission noted that the intercontinental elevated POPOs were noted by the Commission to be subpar at the hotel's original 2002 approval hearing. To be sure, the Intercontinental Hotel has complicated the matter by closing POPOs to hold private events from time to time. The Planning Department has an active enforcement complaint dating back to March 13, 2008 for failure to abide by conditions of approval. Nonetheless, the Commission agrees that the Victoria Manalo Draves Park provides the community with accessible amenities for both active and passive recreation. The Commission concluded that as the park is open from 5 a.m. to midnight, lighting and safety improvements at this park could offer the community a more usable resource than the maintenance of the elevated terraces as open space. Again, we do thank Supervisor Kim for all her efforts over the 2 years to find a solution, and the Commission's recommendations approval as amended. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Supervisor Kim, I'm going to ask Mr. Starr a couple questions. And if you know the answer, Supervisor Kim, just jump on. And so really, how did we come up with the $290.70 per square foot in the cost calculation?
I think that was just conversations between the supervisor's office looking at what land costs around the area, and
Okay, Supervisor Kim. So my question, and you might be the best person to answer, was how did you come up with the $290.70 cost per square foot?
So, as I had mentioned in my opening remarks, we did not come up with that square footage fee. It was the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development that came up with that fee, and it was based on the cost per square foot to improve open space in the South of Market area, so in the neighborhood surrounding the Intercontinental Hotel. And we used the cost at Mint Plaza, Eagle Alley, and Annie Alley as a reference point to come up with the $290 a square foot proposal. There, just so you know, we did consider 2 other open space fee calculations. One was Eastern Neighborhoods, of which Intercontinental Hotel is close to. That was only $96 a square foot, and that was actually the original proposal. The planning department had said that was not enough funding per square foot, and so our office agreed with their assessment, and we went back to the table to figure out another fee that we could utilize that would more accurately reflect what it either costs to acquire or to improve open space in the South of Market.
So another question, follow-up. Did we account for how much revenue the current space is generating or has generated in the past?
The current space being the Popo at the Intercontinental Hotel. So what they generate by using it for private rentals versus not being able to. No, we did not calculate the revenue or profit that they can make now using the Popo for private use versus public use. The project sponsor is here if you would like to ask that question.
Love to. Do you see them?
Yes, the project sponsor is here.
Okay, will the
And I
project
think they're
sponsor please come
deciding
up?
who
I have a
will.
couple questions. Is the project sponsor here?
They are here, and so if a representative of the Intercontinental Hotel could come up and speak.
Thank you. So my question is we're talking about the calculation and wanted to know specifically if we took into account how much revenue the current space is generating or how much it generated in the past.
Larry Badner of Badner Urban Planning, representing the Intercontinental Hotel. No, I don't believe we took that into account.
Okay.
The question is, how much revenue will you be able to generate if you are able to convert this POPO into private use? Not how much will it generate, but how much do you estimate it to generate? That is a question from the chair.
I actually don't have that figure. I do know that what it will do, in general terms, is allow greater occupancy by the Union Hotel, Union-operated hotel, allow greater meetings also, which will benefit both the city for tax basis and the art fund, and also improve employment in the hotel. But I do not have a specific.
I do know that the hotel does have this cost calculation, because you wouldn't have come to our office to ask for a fee out if you hadn't cost out the potential revenue that would be generated by converting this public space into private use. So if you do not have the answer, then I'd like a member of the project sponsor to come up with that number at committee today. Because I know that number exists, so we'd like to have it heard.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. I think it's important to get to the bottom of what's happening here. I suppose this question is for the project sponsor, if not planning, or you, Supervisor Kim. But my question is the terrace on the 4th and 6th floors of 88 Howard, are they still available for rental today? Perhaps the project sponsor could come sit a little closer to the microphone so we can get these questions answered quickly. And let's not make this difficult.
I apologize. I was consulting with the client. I did not hear your.
Sure. So the question is: the terrace on the terrace that's on the 4th and the 6th floor of 88 Howard. Is it still available for rental today?
Some of the terrace on the 4th floor is available for rental.
How much? Like half, 3/4?
I would say about 3/4.
Okay.
So in defiance of the planning enforcement that is before you today, you are illegally renting out this public space? That was not my understanding when I introduced this ordinance.
We have, through the past 4 years, been looking for an open space to substitute for this. So it's been an ongoing process.
But during that time, this is privately owned public space, so you actually cannot be renting this out. So you're telling me that 3/4 of this space is currently being rented out?
3/4 of one of the terraces.
Okay, that's not acceptable.
Okay.
I can't move forward with an ordinance.
Hi, Karen
supporting-
Johnston on behalf of the Intercontinental Hotel. We're trying to get Peter Kohler, the general manager, here in the chambers to answer the question about projected revenue. But just to be clear, the 4th and 6th floors are public open spaces. They're not exclusive public open spaces. So the code does allow for private use. But this is not a part of a business plan of generating any revenue right now. On occasion, they've had events spill over into the 4th floor terrace, but it's not dedicated revenue that the hotel enjoys right now.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, I don't know what's going on here, Supervisor Kim, but I just pulled off the website today. This is the form that you would use. It's advertised as being able to be rented, the spaces. So that's on the website,
Okay.
Intercontinental.
Could we just pause and I can get the general manager here to answer these questions? He's the one on the ground that actually manages the hotel, and we'll get him here.
Well, here's another question.
Momentarily.
What's the status of the violations that were issued for the 4th and 6th floor terrace?
That Larry can answer, because I believe that there was some discussion about the glass of the Intercontinental Hotel, which had been corrected through the violation process. And then as it related to the 4th and 6th floors, let me defer that over to Larry.
Larry Badner again. They're in abeyance because over the last 4 years we've been searching for an open space. The planning department has asked for updates. We've been working with them. So they have not proceeded to go to the next step in enforcement, but because there was an understanding we were looking for an alternate open space or for fee out.
So the violations haven't been paid?
There are no dues paid. There
Okay.
is no fee. There is no fine.
Okay.
There is a notice of alleged violation, and I think a notice of violation. It has never proceeded to a further step because the department, I believe, has been satisfied. We've been trying to figure out a way to address the issue.
Mr. Starr?
Yes.
Please. Oh, you didn't hear the question? Okay, the question was, what's the status of the violations that were issued on the 4th and 6th floor terrace?
I believe Mr. Badner had it correct. We had been working with them over the several years to try to find a solution to this problem. This theoretically would be a solution to that problem.
Theoretically what?
Would be a solution to the problem, and the violation would be taken care of.
All right, thank you. And Supervisor Peskin?
Do you have any information as to whether or not the violation was abated? Because we've heard now two different stories from representatives of the hotel, one that the violation continues unabated and the other that it does not. Do you know which is true?
I don't. I know that the enforcement action is still open, so the issue hasn't been resolved. It seems like they still are renting it out if Supervisor Cohen found that on their website.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Supervisor, thank you. Supervisor
For Mr. Starr.
Kim.
Questions for Mr. Starr. So I am supportive of a fee out in this particular site because it's clear that this privately owned open space is public open space is not well utilized, even with the additional signage, and so it makes much more sense for us to use funding for this to improve open space or to acquire more open space in the South Market area. But I'm curious as to why, if we pass this ordinance, that would take care of a violation that has already occurred. So that's the first question. And the second question is, what is the penalty or fee associated with that violation of this law?
To the first question, if we try everything we can to make the violator abate it so that we don't go to that step of charging a fee. So we've been working with them over the past few years to try to get them to abate it. As for the fee, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I can try to check with my colleagues to see if they can let me know.
We do have a set fee, though, or
yeah, I believe it is.
penalty amount.
I would say $500
and why would we
a day.
waive that if we pass this legislation? Because a violation did occur when they were not supposed to rent it out previously. So moving forward, they can use it for private open space. But that doesn't mean just because you're looking for a solution that you can just go out there and start renting it out.
Correct. You're correct. We don't.
So I don't see why
assessing-
the passage of this ordinance would abate those fees.
I don't think we've already started assessing the fees. If you like, I can double check. It wasn't information I was given for this, but I can.
And do you know how many times this space was used for rental
I do not know.
over the last 4 years?
No.
Under the impression that it was not on the market.
We were under the impression that it had been used for private events, but we didn't. I don't think we knew that it was a continual thing going on.
So if
Supervisor Peskin.
may, through the chair, Mr. Starr, this is a little bit recalling to me the Academy of Art issue, where we are being asked to potentially settle the matter, wherein we would wrap up the entire case. We would grant them certain entitlements, and we would get certain fees and penalties and wrap it up in one case. It seems to me that if there's an ongoing enforcement action that has some amount of penalties that need to be assessed or settled, that should be part and parcel of our granting this approval or entitlement or get out of jail free card, that they should all be wrapped up together. Does that sound right to you? Rather
It does
than
sound
do
right.
this,
I'm not sure penalty fees have been assessed yet. I know that we have a multi-step enforcement process, and we don't start assessing penalties until a certain point. I'm not clear on where we are at that point.
wait, you've already said it's been years.
Right.
That doesn't seem to make any sense.
I think they were trying to get the Intercontinental into compliance, and we had been working with them over at least the last 2 years on this particular solution.
Mr. Starr, if I may, before the project sponsor comes up, how long is the process before planning department actually enforces their actions? I feel like 2 years is too long.
Certainly.
How many other downtown buildings are violating their POPO obligation to the city? And are we letting them just get away with it?
No, I wouldn't say that.
How many notice of violations has the planning department issued on POPOs here in the downtown area?
I don't have that information.
So I just don't understand. I just have to agree with Supervisor Peskin. I wasn't aware that the project sponsor was openly listing rentals of the POPO prior to this ordinance getting passed here at the Board of Supervisors. It is inappropriate, and it is in bad faith. And I'm actually surprised to learn that not only had these violations been going on over the last 4 years, but we haven't even assessed a penalty or fine for that illegal use of the POPO. So please tell me if I'm wrong. Can they rent out privately owned open space for private rentals at any time?
No, I don't believe they can. I'm happy to get some more information from you if you'd like to ask the project sponsor some questions, and I think I can clear up the violation issue with.
Just to say,
Supervisor Peskin.
yeah, both Supervisor Kim and I, in another incarnation, serve as, Supervisor Kim is the member, and I'm the alternate on the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And we had a case this year where the individual was in violation of their existing permit. They came in and settled that case, and then they came back several months later and asked for some other approvals. And we weren't going to, it seems to me like the cart's in front of the horse here, and what planning should say is, hey, the unauthorized behavior has stopped. The fines have been levied and paid or otherwise settled, and this is the way we are going to bring it into compliance with this piece of legislation. It seems that that's the proper series of steps, and I have to concur with Supervisor Kim. It's just troubling, particularly given the decade that it's taken to deal with getting serious about the Academy of Art, that this seems to be a little bit of a pattern of, failure to really enforce, for what it's worth.
All right, thank you. Looks like the project sponsor has a few remarks.
Good afternoon. My name is John Buss, and I'm representing the Intercontinental Hotel. I was originally the development manager during construction. I'd like to clarify, the space is not rented out. It is an integral part of the hotel operation and is used when we have insufficient space. For example, we have 43,000 square feet of meeting spaces, 2 ballrooms and 21 meeting rooms, and there are functions which cannot be handled in all that. And there will be a supplementary lunch in there on the terrace occasionally and breakfast occasionally, but it is not rented out to the public. It is an integral part of the hotel operation of the public spaces. And it has been very successful. And to emphasize, we have spent more than 4 years looking for alternatives. As Supervisor Kim has said, we've tried to do a joint venture to create additional public space, and we feel that this solution, which takes a very unsatisfactory, I think everybody's agreed that the 4th floor and 6th floor terraces are not satisfactory as POPOs. The solution that we have arrived at, and we are greatly encouraged by it, increases by many-fold the number of usable hours of open space. But please be assured, the space is part of the hotel. and that's the only way it's been run. If there's additional revenue, the sales tax will go directly to the other appropriate people. And it does create additional jobs. They're all union jobs. There's nothing illegal about it other than the fact that we're not doing it with a permit at the present time.
Okay, so I just want to ask a couple of questions about your statement, because this is actually news to me, that you are openly using the POPO for private usage. When you use it for spillover breakfast and dinner space, do you charge an entity for that, or do you let them use it for free?
I don't know the answer to the detail, but it's an integral part of the revenue that would come for the use of the ballroom. Mm-hmm. If you have catering in a ballroom or a conference room, there's a charge for it, but it is not an additional rental to some outside party.
It is not an additional rental, so you do not you rent it out for free then. So when you have a breakfast or dinner spillover on this POPO, you let the entity that's sponsoring the dinner or breakfast use it free of charge.
Supervisor, I'm not an operator, and Mr. Kohler will clarify it for you. But the fact is, the use of the ballroom or the
if you don't have the answer to the question, then you don't have to provide a different answer.
It's built into the cost of the food and drink.
So there is a charge that is assessed when you use the space, even though that is a clear breach of the law, of what you are required to do under the current mandate of the POPO.
I don't think it's a clear breach.
Why do you not think it's a clear breach?
What is a breach is the fact that we don't have it accessible to the public between 9 and 5 days a week. Occasionally, it is occupied by the tent.
Okay, that will be a question to the planning department in terms of the hours, because it could be the case that the planning department has clearly articulated that the POPO only needs to be open from 9 to 5, in which case I would understand if you use and rented out the POPO outside of those hours. I'm not sure if breakfast always ends by 9 a.m., et cetera, but I am very troubled by the fact that the project sponsor has repeatedly violated the law. I've been working in good faith with the project sponsor over the last 4 years to find a solution so that you can fee out, so that we can have better usage of funds for open space in the South Market area. I agree. I still am committed to the intent of this legislation, but I'm troubled that during this time that I've been working in good faith with the project sponsor has been openly and blatantly violating what I believe is the law in terms of privately renting out this public open space, and that it's doing it on its own website, which I was not aware of. Supervisor Malia Cohen's office has brought this to my attention at committee hearing today. So I just think we have a little bit of work to do before I feel comfortable with this moving out of the committee.
All right, thank you. So Supervisor Kim, just so I'm clear, you want to just continue to the call of chair? Mm-hmm. All right, Supervisor Peskin, can you make a motion?
I just would like to note that there was, this matter has been noticed in the newspaper. If we do continue to the call of chair, we will need to reissue the notice.
We also need to take public comment on this item too, I think, too. So let's go ahead. We'll think about what motion we'll entertain. Let's go ahead and open up for public comment. Is there anyone in the public that'd like to speak on this item? Any public?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the glamorous stuff. I appreciate a lot of the questions that have been raised today, and of course I fully support that those questions get answered, but I'm here today really to speak about the community need for lights. Like I said, it is the glamorous, sexy stuff that we've been talking about for 10 years. So I went back through my emails this morning to see like exactly how long as a community we've been asking for this, and it went back to 2010. And so I personally am not a fan of any POPO, and I definitely hear the concern and the worry about any kind of precedent that this would set. But I feel like Supervisor Kim captured it very well. I was at a presentation about Central Soma a couple weeks ago, and they were very clear about how much they have learned in the last few years about POPOs and what makes a good one and what makes a not good one. And so I feel like the city is kind of learning how to work that a little better to where it will actually benefit the neighborhoods and residents around them. And so I just really want to emphasize that this park has needed lights for a really long time, and the community stands in full support of that, not just to extend the use of the park during the day by extending the hours and making it more accessible, but even the folks who live around the park. Having increased lighting will reduce break-ins. It will just increase the level of safety. When you walk down a dark street, you feel a lot less safe than when there are lights and you can see what's going on around you. I also just really want to emphasize that we hope our PD delivers the lights as transparently and timely as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, comment.
Do you have a question for the speaker?
I don't have a, no, if public comment's over, I just
Okay.
have a.
Public comment is closed at this time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do kind of have a high-level comment, just as a member of the board who, I can't remember what year it was, but over a decade, 14 years ago, was one of the votes in favor of creating a SUD to ultimately entitle this hotel. And one of the things that I kind of noticed was that one of the findings from planning was the fact that these open spaces were hard to utilize by the public, that these weren't really good popos. And it kind of, this is a larger policy issue really, Mr. Starr, or Mr. Badner from the day, which is to the extent that we create SUDs and entitle these kinds of projects, we should actually, in approving a design, do them in ways that are actually usable. I mean, I think ultimately, separate and apart from the enforcement issue and whether or not these are being rented out in violation of the requirement, there's, I think, a more fundamental underlying issue, which is that as a matter of urban design, when we do these projects, we should say, hey, actually your fourth and sixth floor terrace are really not going to be used by the public. And ultimately, we're creating private open space, which may be a fine design for the hotel, but is ultimately not beneficial to the public. And we should take heed as we entitle these kind of projects so that we actually have open space that will be used. I mean, one of, the San Francisco's dirty little secrets is that we have all of this, public open space on all of these downtown buildings that not a soul knows about, except for every couple of years John King writes the same story about they exist and that we need to have signs and that people should know that there are these amenities that the public can use. And, then every once in a while planning gets around to reminding those people to put their signs back that they've taken down because they don't want the unwashed masses coming on top of their building or what have you. So this is really, I think, part of a larger policy issue that goes beyond the fourth and sixth floor terraces on the Intercontinental Hotel, and I just wanted to kind of put that on the record. In approving this years ago, I mean, the S in SUD is special. We gave some special entitlements to allow this project to go forward. This was not an as-of-right project. So adherence to these laws, because we made a special law to allow a hotel where it otherwise was not going to go. That's why we changed the law and created a special use district. I think you have to be held to a higher standard when you come to the city and ask for an SUD. Then it's like, yeah, you better really dot your I's and cross your T's.
Yep. Okay, Supervisor Kim.
Yeah, I just want, so I can make clear the asks between now and when this is brought back to the Land Use Committee. A couple of things that I'd like to understand is can individual project sponsors actually rent out for private use privately owned public space? So if there are hours attached to POPOs, then can they rent them outside of those hours? So if we can get that clarified, that would be helpful. The second is I'd like to understand what the penalties and fees associated with violating this planning code is, and I would like to have that resolved before we pass this at the Board of Supervisors. I do still continue to support this fee out. I do think that I want to concur with the words of Supervisor Peskin that moving forward we should be very careful about the types of POPOs that we support and put into place, especially if they are very difficult to enforce. I think we know that we don't have a robust enforcement arm in the planning department around many types of requirements that we ask of developers and property owners, making it really cumbersome for the city to actually enforce our own laws. I understand that. I think as we move forward with the Central Soma plan, as we move forward with other developments, I hope that, and I know that we are thinking a lot about this obligation in particular. One, how to make it more accessible, more on the ground floor, more accessible to the public. But second, that we really think about what the city has the capacity to enforce. I just want to. I want some more assurances from the project sponsor that what I'm just seeing before me on your website today about renting out the Popo, kind of your thinking around that, why that's being done before this legislation was passed took place, and I would like to work out what the cost of that is to the city before we pass this. So, committee members, thank you again for your questions and concerns, and I look forward to when this comes back to the Land Use Committee.
Supervisor Kim, do you have any preference on when? No? Okay.
To the call of the chair.
All right, let's get a motion on this.
I would move that we continue item number 6 to the call of the chair.
All right, without objection. Motion passes. All right, Mr. Clerk. All right, next up, could you call items 7 and 8 together?
Yes. Item number 7, ordinance waiving fees and exempting requirements, authorizing land dedication or construction of off-site units, establishing a 180 Jones Street Affordable Housing Fund, and accepting a $2 million gift.
And I believe Supervisor Kim has some remarks about this.
And just get item number 8.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That is a resolution approving and authorizing an agreement for the conveyance of a parcel of real estate located at 180 Jones Street for $1, consisting of approximately 4,744 square feet in land area for the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development.
Through the request of the project sponsor, because there are continuing discussions on these 2 items, we are making a request to continue this to the next Land Use Committee. I believe because of us moving the inauguration day of the new Board of Supervisors to January 9th and MLK Day on January 16th, this means that this item will not be heard until January 23rd.
Okay. January 20th. That's acceptable. Mr. Clerk, do we need to take public comment on this?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to speak on items 7 and 8, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Supervisor. Steve Vettel on behalf of Group I. I had understood that January 9th was a possibility. Is that there's not going to be a Land Use Committee on January 9th? Is that the case? So our preference would be January 9th, if we could, if that's possible.
Thank you for stating your preference for the record. Is there anyone else that'd like to speak in public comment? All right, public comment is closed. Thank you. Anyone else, committee persons?
And before
Yes.
I make Supervisor Kim's continuation motion, I just want to explain to Mr. Vettel that because the inaugural meeting of the new board is January 9th at noon, there won't be a land use committee, so the next one would be the 23rd. So
right.
with that, I will move that we continue items 7 and 8 to the meeting of 23 January 2017.
All right, without objection. There we go. Mr. Clerk, could you call item 9, please?
Yes, just before I call item number 9, I just wanted to confirm that action taken on number 5 was to recommend that as committee report.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Item number 5.
As a committee report.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Item number 9.
Yes.
Ordinance amending the planning code to permit terrace infill on non-complying structure that is designated as a significant building under Planning Code Article 11 and located in a C3 zoning district.
All right, Supervisor Peskin is the sponsor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very narrowly crafted piece of legislation that is specifically aimed at one structure at 495 Geary, also known as the Clift Hotel. It is an existing non-complying structure in our downtown area, which is higher than the current height limit. At some point when that was built, the height limits must have been downzoned years ago. This is a different type of terrace situation. There is a terrace there that the project sponsor wishes to fill in. This would require, before they even apply to do so, for the board to change the law as to that non-complying structure. And this matter has been reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Commission, both of which recommended 3 changes, which are the subject of the amendments that I'm handing you, Madam Chair. Specifically, they asked that we narrow this to only include the assessor's block upon which 495 Geary sits, as well as to strike one finding, which is on page 3 at line 6, that they felt was not necessary, and finally to add a sunset clause, which would sunset by expiration of law on January 31, 2019. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Starr from the Planning Department.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Planning Department staff. We have another hotel with a terrace. This person is not in violation, though. The item before you would amend the planning code.
And it's not a popo.
And it's not a popo. The item before you would amend the planning code so that buildings that are designated as significant under Article 11 and within the C3 district that are non-complying with regards to height, FAR, and bulk limits would be allowed to infill an existing terrace of up to 1,500 square feet. Any infill would require a major alteration permit and is subject to the Historic Preservation Commission review and approval. The Historic Preservation Commission heard this item on November 16th. The Planning Commission heard this item on December 8th. Both commissions voted to recommend approval with modifications. The modifications they recommended are as follows. 1, to delete finding 2 in the proposed findings for the infill. 2, restrict the proposed change only to the block that contains the Clift Hotel. And 3, place a 2-year time limit on the proposed planning code change and include language that would allow the city attorney to direct the publisher to remove the language without having to change the code. Supervisor, on behalf of on both commissions, we thank you for adding those amendments to the proposed ordinance today. That concludes my remarks, and of course, I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let's take some questions. Let's take some questions. Any member of the public like to speak on item SIT 9? Anyone? Okay. Public comment is closed. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, I would like to move the amendments, if
Yes.
you have no objection.
I have no objection. Let's move them.
And then I would like to send the item as amended to the full board for consideration at our first meeting of the new year on 10 January 2017.
Yes.
All right. And without objection, we'll take those amendments. Without objection, the motion passes as amended. Thank you. Is there any more on the agenda?
That completes the agenda for today.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.